Beneath the endless Egyptian night, the desert stretches out like a golden sea turned to stone. The moon drifts low over the horizon, tracing pale, silver lines across dunes that have not shifted for thousands of years. A soft wind hums through the hollows, whispering through grains of sand that once brushed the walls of forgotten temples. Somewhere beneath those sands lie stories that time itself has buried, tombs that were meant to preserve eternity, and kings who vanished without leaving a trace. This is where our journey begins, in the stillness between the living world and the one that waits beyond it. Egypt has always been a land balanced between opposites, light and shadow, life and death, memory and oblivion. Every grain of sand here hides a contradiction. The same desert that protects the ancient dead also erases their names. The Nile brings life, yet it floods and washes away entire generations of memory. For thousands of years, the pharaohs ruled as divine beings, certain that their spirits would outlast the ages. They built vast necropolises and sealed their tombs with spells meant to guard their souls forever. And yet, despite their preparations, countless rulers have slipped from history's grasp. Their tombs are unmarked, their names erased from stone, their stories unresolved. As the calm night deepens, the mind drifts through this paradox. How could the world's most meticulous civilization lose its greatest kings? Egypt's architects calculated the stars, measured eternity in cubits, and charted the heavens on temple ceilings. But time, patient and merciless, consumes even the grandest ambitions. Perhaps that is why the ancient Egyptians feared being forgotten more than death itself. To them, to lose one's name was to die twice, once in body, once in memory. The vanished pharaohs, then, represent the most haunting mystery of all. How does a god disappear? The desert offers no answers, only silence. In that silence, one can almost hear echoes, fragments of prayers recited over a royal tomb as the last torch flickered out, leaving the king to eternity. Centuries later, when the sands shifted and swallowed the entrance, those prayers became part of the wind. Today, archaeologists dig and dream, chasing those echoes. Each discovery is both revelation and reminder that for every tomb found, a dozen more lie hidden still, somewhere beyond reach. The moon slips lower, its reflection glinting on invisible treasures buried far below. Somewhere, beneath tons of limestone and dust, a chamber may still be sealed, its walls painted with stories of divine journeys. Maybe a forgotten pharaoh rests there, untouched since the day his priests sealed him in. Or maybe it has already been emptied, plundered in the hunger of another age. The truth, like the desert itself, shifts with every step. Egypt's sands hold secrets that do not wish to be rushed. They reward patience, silence, and respect. The mystery of the vanished pharaohs is not just about missing bodies or unopened tombs. It is about humanity's fragile grasp on remembrance. Civilization builds monuments to defy time, but time quietly waits, eroding, covering, erasing. And yet, something endures. The same wind that wears away the stones also carries their stories forward, whispering them to those who still listen. As the camera of imagination pans slowly across the desert, the rhythm of a narration slows to a heartbeat, steady, calm, eternal. The pyramids rise like mountains against the stars, their peaks brushing constellations the pharaohs once called home. Somewhere out there, beneath a dune or hidden within a cliff, lie answers, perhaps even names, long thought lost. The journey to uncover them will lead us through light and shadow, through glory and ruin, through the sacred silence of eternity itself. And as we step forward into this landscape of memory and mystery, one thing becomes certain. In Egypt, nothing is ever truly lost. It merely sleeps, waiting for the moment it is meant to be found. Long before the first pyramid pierced the desert sky, Egypt was a patchwork of villages gathered along the lifeline of the Nile. Each season, the river's flooding brought both destruction and renewal, a rhythm so constant that it shaped the Egyptian soul. Out of this rhythm rose the belief that life itself was cyclical, that death was not an ending, but a turning. It was within this spiritual landscape that the idea of divine kingship was born. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler or a man of power. He was a living embodiment of the gods, a bridge between the mortal and the eternal. To obey the pharaoh was to uphold the balance of the cosmos, and to protect him was to protect the harmony of creation itself. As Egypt's civilization grew in complexity, so did its understanding of eternity. The pharaoh's throne was not just a seat of rule. It was a promise, a continuation of divine order from this world to the next. Each new king inherited more than crowns and lands. He inherited the sacred duty to preserve Ma'at, the cosmic truth that kept chaos at bay. In every statue, inscription, and temple relief, the pharaoh's image was a reflection of both heaven and earth. His reign was seen as a brief but vital chapter in the unbroken story of divine kingship that stretched across millennia. From the earliest dynasties onward, the preparation for the afterlife began almost as soon as a ruler ascended the throne. The construction of a tomb was not an act of vanity, but of cosmic responsibility. Each tomb was conceived as a vessel for resurrection, a carefully orchestrated union of architecture, symbolism, and magic. Architects and priests worked in harmony to align the burial chambers with celestial movements. The walls were carved with spells from the Book of the Dead, designed to guide the king's soul safely through the perils of the underworld. Every corridor, every statue, every offering had purpose, to ensure that the pharaoh would awaken as an eternal being, reigning forever among the gods. For the ancient Egyptians, time was not linear. It was eternal and repeating, like the rising and setting of the sun. The pharaoh, too, was part of this cosmic cycle. When he died, his soul was believed to merge with the sun god Ra, traveling across the heavens by day and through the darkness of the underworld by night. His tomb, therefore, was both a home and a vessel, the place where transformation occurred. But while the spiritual journey was eternal, the physical protection of the body was fragile. This fragility sparked an obsession: how to preserve the divine form of the pharaoh for all time. Thus began the age of elaborate burial rituals and the relentless pursuit of immortality through stone, gold, and secrecy. The tombs themselves became reflections of royal philosophy. The earliest kings built simple mastabas, low, flat structures that hinted at permanence. Over generations, these evolved into the grand pyramids, those colossal symbols of ascent toward the heavens. The Great Pyramid of Khufu still dominates the horizon, a mathematical and spiritual masterpiece. Yet, as centuries passed, the focus shifted from scale to secrecy. Later pharaohs sought not to reach the heavens through size, but to hide their resting places from mortal eyes. The Valley of the Kings became a sacred labyrinth where the royal dead could rest unseen, buried deep within the cliffs, safe from both man and time. Or so they hoped. The belief in divine kingship also extended beyond the pharaoh's death. Each successor was bound to preserve the legacy of his predecessors, to restore their temples, and to speak their names so their souls could continue to exist. The act of remembrance itself was a sacred duty. But when politics turned cruel, when rival dynasties rose or usurpers took the throne, this sacred order fractured. Names were chiseled out, tombs desecrated, histories rewritten. In these moments, the divine continuity faltered and gods became ghosts. The contrast between the pharaoh's claim to eternity and their vulnerability to time's erasure forms one of history's deepest paradoxes. To walk through an ancient Egyptian temple, even today, is to feel this duality. The walls are alive with scenes of eternal kings standing before the gods, offering incense, making vows of foreverness. And yet, many of those kings are nameless now, their hieroglyphs scraped away, their mummies missing, their tombs lost. The once living gods of Egypt became shadows, their promise of immortality betrayed by the shifting sands. Still, the artistry they left behind whispers their ambition. Every painted star on a tomb's ceiling was a prayer. Every hieroglyph a heartbeat echoing through time. The enduring power of divine kingship lies not in the survival of the rulers themselves, but in the faith that sustained them. The Egyptians' belief in the sacred order of life and death made them builders of eternity and seekers of the impossible. They could not stop time, but they could shape it, wrapping their dead in linen, in gold, in stories meant to last forever. This devotion to remembrance ensured that, even when names were lost, the idea of the pharaoh endured. The divine king might vanish from sight, but his presence lingers in every stone, every symbol, every shadow cast across the desert. As we stand in the hush of these ancient landscapes, we begin to sense what the Egyptians themselves must have felt, that to be forgotten is the truest death, and to be remembered is a form of rebirth. The age of eternal kingship may have passed, but its echo still vibrates through the sands and the stars. Every lost tomb, every missing pharaoh, every fragment of name is part of a grander story. The story of humankind's eternal desire to defy the dark and reach for the everlasting light. In the quiet valley west of Nile, far from the palaces and temples of ancient Thebes, a small and secretive village once thrived, Deir el-Medina, the home of the tomb builders. Nestled against the barren cliffs, it was a place both ordinary and extraordinary. By day, the desert sun burned bright upon its mud brick walls, and by night, the stars glowed like eyes watching from eternity. Here lived the artisans, masons, draftsmen, painters, and carvers entrusted with the most sacred work in Egypt, constructing the eternal homes of the pharaohs. Every man and woman in this hidden community carried a burden of reverence and secrecy, for they, more than anyone, shaped the boundary between mortality and the afterlife. The village was a world apart. Its residents were not nobles, yet they served kings, not priests, yet their hands performed sacred acts. Generations of craftsmen passed down their skills, whispering techniques as though they were divine mysteries. They knew how to mix the perfect pigments that would never fade, how to align a chamber so that morning light would fall upon a carved god, how to chisel hieroglyphs that spoke in the language of eternity. The rhythm of their lives was dictated by the tombs they built. Long days of carving in silence, broken only by the scrape of copper tools against stone, and long nights spent beneath a sky so wide it seemed to stretch into the next world. Each craftsman carried an understanding that his work was not merely construction, but creation. The tombs they carved were more than monuments. They were maps of the soul's journey through the underworld. A misplaced line or an incorrect symbol could mean disaster in the afterlife. Precision was worship. The artisans believed that by perfecting their craft, they were helping to secure the pharaoh's rebirth among the stars. They inscribed protective spells, painted the gods in vivid blues and golds, and filled chambers with scenes of divine triumph. The work was exhausting, yet it was guided by faith, a faith that what they built would last for eternity. Inside the narrow corridors of royal tombs, the air would be thick with dust and the scent of oil lamps. The flicker of flame would illuminate half-carved figures, Horus with outstretched wings, Osiris seated upon his throne, and rows of hieroglyphs describing the voyage of the soul. The men who worked there labored in reverent silence, aware that they stood between the living and the divine. Even as they sweated and bled, they were part of something larger than themselves, a sacred machinery designed to preserve the cosmic order. To carve the name of the pharaoh was to give him life. To seal his tomb was to complete the cycle of immortality. The lives of the tomb builders, however, were not without shadow. Despite their sacred duty, they were human, bound by earthly concerns, hunger, illness, and injustice. Records from ancient papyri reveal their voices, preserved like whispers across time. They wrote petitions for fair wages, complained about missing rations, and even went on strike. the first recorded labor strike in human history. Yet, even in their protest, they remained devoted to their craft. They demanded bread, not because they wished to abandon their work, but because they believed the sacred task must continue in dignity. Their faith and purpose was unshakable, even when their world was fragile. In their spare hours, these artisans painted scenes of daily life on the walls of their modest homes. Families eating, musicians playing, children running through courtyards. The same hands that painted gods also painted laughter and love. It is through these humble images that we glimpse their humanity. They were men who dreamed of eternity, but lived each day under the scorching sun, balancing devotion and desire. Their wives and daughters, too, played roles in the spiritual life of the village, preparing offerings, weaving linens for burials, and keeping the rhythms of home alive while their husbands worked in the tombs. The village was not merely a workforce. It was a living soul bound to the fate of kings. When a pharaoh died, the work at Deir el-Medina would intensify. Time became sacred urgency. Every brushstroke, every carved sign had to be completed before the great burial rites began. Once the tomb was sealed, the builders would leave behind their tools, their lamps, even their breath within the chambers. Some left tiny inscriptions hidden in corners, "I was here," or a simple drawing of themselves at work. These quiet signatures were acts of defiance against the anonymity of history, small proofs that mortal hands had touched the eternal. But as the centuries passed, even the work of these devoted builders began to fade. Earthquakes cracked the walls they had so carefully sealed. Robbers tunneled through the mountains they had trusted to guard their kings. The tombs that once shimmered with color fell into silence and shadow. And yet, the craftsmanship endures. The pigments still glow, the carvings still speak, and the artistry still moves the hearts of those who descend into these ancient chambers. Their makers are long gone, their names forgotten, but their devotion has outlived every empire that followed. The story of the tomb builders is a story of paradox, of mortal men creating immortality, of fragile hands shaping everlasting peace. They were neither priests nor pharaohs, yet their work built the stairway to eternity. Their chisels carved the very heartbeat of Egypt's belief in life beyond death. Today, when archaeologists unearth a tool or decipher a note scratched into stone, it is as though the builders themselves are whispering from across time, reminding us that eternity is not only the privilege of kings. It belongs also to those who, in the quiet hours of history, devoted their lives to making eternity real. The sands may have buried their homes, and the winds may have erased their footprints, but the tomb builder's legacy remains carved in every corridor of the royal dead. Through their eyes, we begin to understand that immortality is not only found in gold and grandeur, but in dedication, in the unbroken faith that beauty and purpose can outlast even time itself. In the stillness of the desert night, there is another kind of whisper that drifts among the dunes. Not the prayer of the devoted, but the murmur of those who came to steal from eternity itself. Egypt's tombs, carved to preserve divinity, also became irresistible invitations to mortal greed. Gold, jewels, and sacred treasures were sealed away within the darkness, guarded by spells and curses. Yet for as long as the pharaohs sought to preserve their afterlives, there were others who sought to plunder them. The story of Egypt's tomb robbers is one of hunger, desperation, and temptation, a story where light fades and morality bends beneath the weight of survival. Imagine a moonlit valley, long after the last priest has sealed the tomb and left the desert in silence. The cliffs of Thebes loom like black sentinels, and beneath their surface, corridors twist through rock, corridors filled with gold and secrets. Somewhere in that vast stillness, a group of men moves quietly, carrying crude tools and flickering lamps. Their shadows stretch across the sand like spirits from the underworld. These are not kings or priests, but farmers, laborers, and outcasts. Some are driven by famine, others by greed, and a few by sheer daring. They know the risks. Capture means torture, perhaps execution. Yet the thought of treasures buried in darkness, wealth beyond imagination, calls to them more powerfully than fear. Tomb robbing in ancient Egypt was both crime and heresy. To violate a royal tomb was to disturb a god's eternal rest, an act punishable not only by death but by spiritual damnation. Yet as Egypt's fortunes waned and famine spread, the sanctity of the dead began to weaken in the minds of the living. Historical records, preserved in papyri like the Abbott and Amherst documents, reveal detailed confessions and trials of robbers caught desecrating tombs. In their words, we glimpse the desperation of ordinary people forced to confront the divine. We found the tomb open, one man confessed. We took what we could carry. The gold was heavy, the night was long. Their testimonies read like murmured sins to the gods themselves. These robberies were not always crude acts of greed. Some were careful, even reverent. The thieves would unwrap mummies with trembling hands, whispering apologies to the kings they plundered. They feared the curses that guarded these chambers, invocations carved into the walls warning of blindness, madness, or death for those who disturbed the sleep of the sacred. Still, the pull of gold was stronger. The treasures of eternity were meant to accompany the pharaohs into the next life. Amulets, jewelry, furniture, and vessels of alabaster. In the eyes of the hungry, they became lifelines, the difference between survival and starvation. Thus, the sacred and the profane intertwined beneath the desert sky. Even the tomb builders of Deir el-Medina, who once crafted these resting places with devotion, sometimes became their violators. They knew the labyrinthine corridors better than anyone, and when dynasties fell or wages went unpaid, temptation crept in. Archaeologists have found hidden tunnels linking workers' huts to nearby tomb shafts, signs that loyalty could crumble under pressure. It was not always greed that drove them, but a crumbling world. As Egypt's central power weakened, tombs became symbols of lost glory, and the treasures of the dead became the currency of survival. In some periods, tomb robbing became so widespread that even the state became complicit. Officials organized secret recoveries of royal mummies, moving them to hidden caches to protect them from further desecration. The most famous of these is the royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, discovered in 1881. Inside, archaeologists found more than 40 mummies, including those of Seti I, Ramses II, and Thutmose III, rewrapped and concealed by priests during the collapse of the New Kingdom. These priests were not robbers, but guardians of what remained sacred. They stripped tombs of gold not to sell, but to protect, hiding the royal dead in one place so that at least their souls might find peace. Yet even in this act of preservation, there was loss. The original tombs, carefully built for eternity, were emptied, their silence broken forever. There is something hauntingly human about the tomb robbers. They stood in the same darkness as the kings they disturbed, breathing the same ancient air. In those silent chambers, where only the flicker of a flame illuminated the painted gods, the line between reverence and violation blurred. Perhaps some felt awe. Perhaps some prayed forgiveness before lifting a jeweled mask or breaking a seal. In the end, they, too, became part of the story, forgotten souls swallowed by the same desert that consumed the pharaohs' names. The papyri that record these crimes also reveal a world of corruption and contradiction. Police scribes, tasked with protecting tombs, sometimes join the thieves. High officials purchase stolen treasures in secret, turning the robbery of the dead into a quiet trade. One investigator lamented in his report that the guardians have become the looters. Even in ancient times, the sanctity of the tombs was fragile, an illusion of permanence easily shattered by human need. As centuries passed, new waves of robbers came. Greek mercenaries, Roman officials, and later, 19th-century explorers seeking fame and fortune. The cycle repeated, discovery and desecration, reverence and greed. Each generation disturbed the sands anew, claiming to uncover what others had tried to preserve. Yet, paradoxically, it is through this cycle of theft and recovery that many treasures survive to tell their stories today. Without the robbers' tunnels, archaeologists might never have found some of Egypt's most famous tombs. Even the act of violation became, in time, a form of revelation. The darkness of tomb robbery reveals a deeper truth about humanity, that even in a civilization devoted to eternity, nothing remains untouched by time or desire. The pharaohs built their resting places to last forever, but forever is a fragile thing when measured against human hunger. Still, something endures beyond the theft, beyond the ruin. The walls of the tombs, though scarred and broken, still whisper prayers for rebirth. The faces of painted gods still gaze outward, calm and unchanging, as if they have forgiven the trespass. In their unblinking eyes lies the lesson that Egypt has always offered, that the struggle between light and darkness, reverence and greed, is eternal, and that even when eternity is stolen, it can never be completely lost. As the desert night deepens, the wind carries both guilt and grace. The sands shift, covering the traces of those who came to steal, just as they covered the kings who once ruled the world. Time, impartial and infinite, buries both thief and pharaoh alike. And in that quiet balance, Egypt keeps its secret, that no one, not even the robbers of tombs, can truly escape the reach of eternity. Before the towering pyramids of Giza rose from the sands, before the Valley of the Kings was carved into the cliffs, Egypt was a land of beginnings, a kingdom still learning to define itself. The early dynasties, stretching back more than 5,000 years, laid the foundations of a civilization that would outlast almost all others. Yet within those earliest chapters lies one of history's deepest enigmas, the vanished pharaohs. These are the first divine rulers, men whose reigns shaped the destiny of Egypt, and yet whose tombs, bodies, and even names have been swallowed by time. They ruled at the dawn of history, when the line between myth and fact was still blurred, and today their absence is as haunting as their power once was. The earliest pharaoh known to history is Narmer, or perhaps Menes, depending on which legend one believes. He was the unifier, the conqueror who joined Upper and Lower Egypt into one kingdom around 3100 BCE. Ancient carvings show him wearing the crowns of both lands, standing in triumph as Egypt's first divine monarch. Yet no one knows where Narmer's body lies. Archaeologists have searched the desert necropolises of Abydos and Saqqara, uncovering fragments of early royal tombs, but the final resting place of the man who founded the world's greatest civilization remains a mystery. Some say his tomb lies hidden beneath layers of unmarked sand. Others whisper that it was destroyed by flood or time, or that his burial was deliberately concealed to protect his soul from desecration. After Narmer came a line of kings whose identities shimmer between clarity and myth. The tombs of Aha, Jur, Jet, and Den, rulers of the first dynasty, have been found in varying states of ruin at Abydos. Yet even here, mystery lingers. Many of the burials are empty or disturbed, their treasures long removed, their mummies lost. Some contain decoy chambers and false walls, perhaps intended to mislead robbers. Others seem incomplete, as if the burials were rushed or relocated. It is possible that some early pharaohs were buried twice, once in Abydos, the sacred city of Osiris, and again in Saqqara, closer to Memphis, the political heart of the kingdom. Were these dual burials symbolic or practical attempts to hide the true tombs? No one can say for certain. The deeper one looks into Egypt's early dynasties, the more the sands of certainty shift. The second dynasty, for instance, is a puzzle wrapped in silence. The names of its kings, Hotep Sekemwi, Ninetjer, Peribsen, Kheskemwi, are inscribed in fragmentary lists, yet the archaeology tells an uneven story. Peribsen, uniquely, replaced the falcon god Horus with the jackal-headed Seth as his royal emblem, an act that must have shaken the spiritual foundations of his time. Why'd he do it? Some believe Egypt was divided once more, torn between north and south, and that Peribsen ruled one half while his rivals claimed the other. If true, then the missing tombs of this era may have been casualties of civil strife, destroyed, hidden, or erased from history as rival kings sought to claim sole divinity. The duality of Egypt's earliest rulers reflects the eternal tension between order and chaos, between the light of kingship and the shadow of oblivion. In the ruins of Abydos, archaeologists have uncovered burial enclosures made of mud brick, surrounded by sacrificial graves of servants and courtiers who followed their rulers into death. Yet many of these graves show signs of disturbance, looting, or natural decay. Whole sections of the royal necropolis have collapsed into the desert floor. The Nile, over millennia, has shifted its course, flooding some burial sites and covering others in deep silt. Even when tombs are found, the remains inside often tell stories of confusion. A few bones, fragments of jewelry, traces of burned wood. The builders of Egypt's first tombs were creating something that had never existed before. Monuments meant to defy eternity, and yet they could not control the forces that would soon test their work. The third dynasty, which followed, brought monumental innovation with the reign of Djoser and his architect, Imhotep. The step pyramid at Saqqara became Egypt's first stone monument, an eternal staircase to the heavens. Yet even here, uncertainty reigns. Djoser's tomb, though magnificent, appears to have been robbed in antiquity, its treasures gone. His successors, like Sekhemkhet, began ambitious pyramids that were never completed. The so-called buried pyramid of Sekhemkhet, discovered in the 20th century, was found sealed but empty. Inside, archaeologists discovered a pristine alabaster sarcophagus with its lid still in place. When it was opened, the sarcophagus was found to contain nothing. No body, no relics, only silence. Was the pharaoh buried elsewhere, or was the tomb a decoy to mislead would-be thieves? The emptiness speaks louder than any treasure could. These early vanishings are not isolated incidents. They are patterns. Across Egypt's ancient sites, from Abydos to Saqqara, archaeologists have found the marks of disappearance. Whole reigns vanish from official lists, replaced by blank spaces or usurped names. The Turin King list, written thousands of years later, contains deliberate omissions, gaps where rulers were forgotten or erased. Some were likely victims of political revision, their legacies intentionally wiped clean. Others may have perished in floods, their tombs lost beneath shifting sands. The desert, for all its dryness, is a restless thing. Dunes migrate, cliffs crumble, and time devours stone. What remains of the earliest pharaohs are echoes, fragments of ivory plaques, shards of pottery inscribed with names, and hieroglyphs half erased by millennia. Yet perhaps the most haunting aspect of these vanished kings is how their disappearance shaped Egypt's obsession with eternity. The losses of the early dynasties may have taught later rulers that visibility was both a glory and a danger. The massive pyramids that followed, the works of Sneferu, Khufu, and Khafre, can be read as both declarations of immortality and defenses against oblivion. The early kings built low and were lost. Their successors built high to touch the sky. But even those monuments would, in time, suffer the same fate. Eternity, it seemed, was a dream the desert could not fully hold. To imagine the vanished pharaohs today is to imagine a world half lit by firelight and half shrouded in myth. Their names, faintly preserved in temple inscriptions, are like stars half hidden by cloud. We know they existed. The records, though broken, confirm it, but their faces, their voices, their final resting places are gone. It is as though they ruled not in stone and sunlight, but in the memory of the earth itself. When the wind sweeps across Abydos at dusk, it carries the same dust that once covered their tombs, the same air that filled their lungs. The kings may be gone, but their absence is alive, echoing through every discovery that deepens rather than solves the mystery. Somewhere beneath the sands, perhaps, the tomb of Narmer still lies sealed, its treasures untouched, its king waiting to rise once more into the light. Or perhaps it has been reduced to dust, its walls long crumbled, its relics scattered across the centuries. In either case, its silence remains sacred. For Egypt's first pharaohs, who ruled at the dawn of civilization, are no longer men or even gods. They are mysteries incarnate, the foundation stones of eternity itself. To seek them is to chase shadows at the edge of time, and to find them would be to uncover the beginning of everything. As the Old Kingdom reached its zenith, the pyramids rose like mountains against the horizon, each one a stairway to eternity, each stone a declaration that death was merely a passage. Yet behind these marvels of engineering and faith lay an undercurrent of tension, ambition, and secrecy. The age of the pyramids was not only about monumental grandeur. It was also about the unseen fears that haunted the builders. Fears of desecration, of being forgotten, of the afterlife slipping beyond reach. The great kings of the 4th and 5th dynasties, Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure, and their successors, carved their names into history with timeless precision. But even among their triumphs, a shadow grew. Tombs vanished, mummies disappeared, and royal lineages were quietly erased, leaving only stone to speak for them. Khufu, the mighty builder of the Great Pyramid at Giza, reigned around 2550 BCE. His monument remains the most studied and awe-inspiring structure of the ancient world. Yet the irony of Khufu's immortality is that his body, the very thing for which his pyramid was built, has never been found. Deep within the pyramid's heart, hidden passageways and sealed chambers seem to promise revelation. But to this day, no mummy of Khufu has ever been discovered. Some claim that grave robbers, centuries after his death, plundered his remains. Others suggest something stranger, that Khufu was never buried there at all. Perhaps the true tomb lies hidden beneath the plateau, still sealed beneath tons of rock, or perhaps his burial was secreted away to protect it from profanation. Even in his own time, Khufu was seen as a godlike but distant figure, powerful, enigmatic, and feared. The mystery of his missing body mirrors the ambiguity of his legacy. The same enigma extends to Khafre, the son who succeeded him and builder of the second pyramid, whose face may be immortalized in the Great Sphinx. His pyramid stands nearly as tall as his father's, its limestone casing still clinging in patches to the summit like remnants of divine fire. Yet again, no mummy has ever been found. Archaeologists discovered an empty granite sarcophagus within the burial chamber, but no trace of the king himself. As with Khufu, theories abound. Perhaps the bodies were destroyed during the turbulent First Intermediate Period. Perhaps priests, fearing tomb raiders, relocated the royal remains to hidden caches as they would in later dynasties. Whatever the truth, the tombs of the greatest pyramid builders stand as hollow triumphs, vast monuments to the idea of eternity, but devoid of their eternal occupants. Menkaure, builder of the third pyramid at Giza, fared no better in the afterlife's preservation. His tomb was found open in antiquity, and though fragments of a sarcophagus were recovered, the mummy attributed to him was tragically lost at sea in the 19th century when the ship carrying it to Britain sank in a storm. It is almost poetic, almost cruel, that the last of the Giza pyramid kings, whose monument was the smallest yet most elegant, remains as elusive as his predecessors. The waters took him, as the sands took the others. The Nile, the sea, the desert, all three forces of Egypt united in claiming the kings they once served. Beyond Giza, the 5th and 6th dynasties continued the tradition of pyramid building, but with a notable change. The later pyramids were smaller, their masonry less durable, their inscriptions more elaborate. Inside, walls were covered with the pyramid texts, the earliest known religious writings in human history, filled with spells, hymns, and guidance for the journey through the afterlife. These texts reveal a growing anxiety among the pharaohs, a need for more words, more rituals, more magic to secure eternity. Yet even as the prayers multiplied, the bodies disappeared. Tombs from this period, like those of Unas and Teti, were found violated, their sarcophagi empty or disturbed. The kings had sought to protect themselves with sacred language, but it was not enough. Time, greed, and shifting faith eroded their defenses. The enigma deepens with the fall of the Old Kingdom. The age of pyramid builders gave way to chaos, famine, drought, civil unrest. The power of the pharaohs waned, and local governors, or nomarchs, began to rule in their stead. Temples fell silent, workers deserted their posts, and once great necropolises were abandoned. In this time of collapse, many royal tombs may have been deliberately desecrated or plundered by desperate hands. Priests, unpaid and fearful, might have removed sacred objects for safekeeping or survival. The absence of royal mummies from this era may not be mere accident. It may be the result of deliberate concealment, the first of many hidden burials that would define Egypt's funerary history for centuries to come. Some Egyptologists believe that during this period of turmoil, certain priests created secret caches, hidden tombs meant to protect the remains of their divine rulers from destruction. The later discovery of such caches in Thebes, containing dozens of mummified kings and queens, supports this theory. Could similar hidden chambers exist beneath the sands of Saqqara or Giza, still untouched? Modern technology, from ground-penetrating radar to cosmic ray muon scans, has begun to peer beneath the surfaces of these ancient monuments. In recent years, scientists have detected unexplained voids within the Great Pyramid, vast, sealed spaces that have remained undisturbed for over 4 millennia. Are these voids architectural features, or could they conceal what time has so far withheld? The true resting place of Khufu himself? The mystery of the missing mummies is more than an archaeological puzzle. It is a philosophical one. The Egyptians believed that the preservation of the body was essential to eternal life. Without the body, the soul could not recognize itself in the afterlife. To lose the body was to lose eternity. And yet, somehow, the greatest of Egypt's kings vanished, their physical forms erased while their monuments remained. It is as though their immortality shifted from flesh to stone, their souls absorbed by the pyramids they built. Each pyramid, silent and watchful, might not be a tomb at all, but a kind of vessel, a spiritual machine designed to hold the pharaoh's essence within the geometry of eternity itself. In the stillness of Giza at night, when the desert wind sighs across the plateau, one can almost sense that essence. The pyramids are not empty, not truly. They hum with memory, with the breath of those who labored, prayed, and dreamed beneath their shadow. The stars above align with the shafts within, and for a moment, time folds, ancient and present meeting in perfect symmetry. Somewhere within that alignment, perhaps Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure still reign, not as bones, but as echoes of a civilization that dared to defy death. Their missing bodies are not signs of failure, but of transcendence. They have become one with the mystery they built. In this way, the vanished pharaohs of the Old Kingdom remain both absent and eternal. Their monuments endure, stripped of all that was once inside, yet still radiant with power. The pyramid's emptiness is not a loss. It is the final expression of Egyptian belief that what is hidden is sacred, and what endures unseen may be closest to eternity. When the Old Kingdom collapsed and the pyramids fell silent, Egypt entered an age of shadows. The once unshakable order that had defined the reigns of Khufu and his descendants dissolved into chaos. Crops failed, the Nile's floods faltered, and the voice of the pharaoh, once divine and absolute, grew faint. This was the first intermediate period, a time when the light of Egypt's centralized power dimmed and local rulers rose in its absence. Between the ruins of the Old Kingdom and the rebirth of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt became a land divided, politically, spiritually, and even in death. The great royal tombs were no longer built, and those that already stood became targets for plunder, desecration, and erasure. It was during this murky era that the mystery of Egypt's hidden tombs deepened further, as royal lineages disappeared from record, and mummies, kings and queens alike, were lost to the sands. Archaeological evidence suggests that during this dark age, the royal necropolises of Giza, Saqqara, and Abusir were repeatedly looted. Once guarded tombs stood open, their treasures ripped from the chambers, their inscriptions defaced. The protective spells and pyramid texts carved into stone proved powerless against human desperation. In ancient writings from later periods, we find echoes of what this must have felt like, the violation of eternity itself. To the Egyptians, disturbing a tomb was not just theft, it was an act of cosmic imbalance, a breaking of Ma'at, the sacred harmony that sustained the universe. Yet as famine and civil war spread, reverence gave way to survival. Priests fled, temples decayed, and entire royal cemeteries fell into ruin. For the first time in centuries, Egypt's divine rulers seemed to vanish from both earth and heaven. The names of many pharaohs from this period are known only from fragments, damaged stele, incomplete lists, or mentions in later records. Kings like Anktifi of Hierakonpolis, who ruled as a local warlord, wrote of chaos. All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger. People were eating their children. Such words remind us that the grandeur of Egypt's past was no safeguard against the fragility of its present. In this desperation, royal burials lost their sanctity. Some rulers may have been interred hastily, their tombs modest and unmarked, blending into the necropolises of their ancestors. Others may have chosen secrecy as their only protection, hidden burials meant to escape the gaze of looters and rival claimants. This period also saw a change in how Egyptians imagined the afterlife. The concept of divine kingship, once reserved for the pharaoh alone, began to extend to common people. The pyramid texts evolved into the coffin texts, prayers and spells now inscribed on wooden coffins for nobles and citizens alike. In a sense, eternity had become democratized, but with that shift came an erosion of the pharaoh's exclusive divinity. The gods of Egypt were still worshipped, but their intermediaries, the kings, were no longer unassailable. Perhaps this loss of sacred authority is reflected in the missing tombs of the time. When power became human again, so too did mortality. One of the most haunting mysteries of this era lies in the fragmented tombs found at Heracleopolis and Thebes. Excavations have revealed partial royal burials, chambers with traces of regal iconography, but no names, no intact mummies, no funerary goods. Some scholars believe these may belong to pharaohs of the 9th or 10th dynasties, whose reigns were brief and violent. Their monuments were destroyed by rivals, their legacies erased. Others think these are the tombs of nobles who usurped the trappings of kingship during a time when power was fragmented. Either way, they stand as ghostly reminders of an age when Egypt's unity was broken and the very idea of kingship was being redefined. In the midst of this chaos, the southern city of Thebes began to rise. There, a new dynasty, the 11th, started to consolidate power, slowly restoring order under rulers like Mentuhotep II. His reign marked the rebirth of centralized Egypt, and with it, a new vision of burial and eternity. Mentuhotep's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari was unlike anything before it. Part temple, part tomb, built into the cliffs on the west bank of Thebes. It represented a bridge between earth and heaven, life and death. Yet even here, the traces of earlier loss are visible. Mentuhotep's tomb complex contains subsidiary burials, women of his court, possibly priestesses or queens, many of which were found desecrated or empty. The trauma of the previous age lingered. Egypt had learned that stone could not protect the dead forever. It is possible that, during this transitional era, the tradition of hiding royal tombs truly began. Some Egyptologists theorize that priests, traumatized by centuries of tomb robbery, began to experiment with secrecy rather than grandeur. Instead of colossal monuments visible for miles, they favored more discreet burials cut into cliffs or hidden in valleys, a practice that would later culminate in the famous Valley of the Kings. If this theory is true, then the first intermediate period was not merely a time of loss, but of transformation. Out of fear and ruin, Egypt developed a new philosophy, that eternity was safest in shadow. The evidence for these hidden beginnings is tantalizing. In the cliffs of central Egypt, particularly near Asiut and Abydos. Archaeologists have discovered tombs with no external markers, sealed so completely that they were only found through erosion thousands of years later. Some contain fragments of royal symbolism, broken statues, remnants of canopic jars, and cartouches chiseled away. These suggest that certain tombs once belonged to rulers whose names were later expunged. Were they overthrown usurpers? Victims of civil war? Or perhaps kings whose burials were intentionally obscured to protect them from the chaos of their age? Each possibility deepens the mystery. The absence of identifiable royal mummies from this era adds to the intrigue. Unlike the clear funerary lineages of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, the First Intermediate Period is a blank space in Egypt's physical record. Some scholars argue that the royal mummies may have been destroyed long ago. Others believe they still exist, buried in yet undiscovered caches. Egypt's desert is vast, and beneath its surface lie countless valleys, ravines, and caves untouched by modern exploration. The very emptiness of this period, the missing tombs, the erased names, invites speculation. Perhaps the kings who vanished did so by design, choosing secrecy as a final act of control over chaos. As Egypt transitioned into the Middle Kingdom, the memory of the lost pharaohs lingered like an ache beneath the nation's reborn pride. The new rulers would look back on this dark age with both horror and reverence, determined never to repeat its mistakes. They would build again, but differently, less visibly, more spiritually, as if the vanished tombs of their ancestors had taught them that eternity thrives best when hidden from the world's gaze. And so, from the ruins of the Old Kingdom's glory and the First Intermediate Period's despair, Egypt emerged renewed. The vanishing of the early tombs was not the end of Egypt's story, but its quiet reawakening, the seed from which the Valley of the Kings would one day bloom. The sands had taught a lesson that would echo for millennia, that immortality is not carved in stone, but buried in silence. With the rise of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt entered what many historians call its classical age, a period of revival, order, and renewed faith in the afterlife. The chaos of the First Intermediate Period had left deep scars upon the Egyptian psyche, yet from those wounds emerged wisdom. The new pharaohs, beginning with Mentuhotep II and followed by rulers like Amenemhat I and Senusret III, understood the fragility of power and the impermanence of monuments. Theirs was not the age of vast pyramids or sun temples, but of subtlety and strategy, both in life and in death. They learned from their vanished ancestors that the louder a tomb spoke, the quicker it drew destruction. Thus, a new philosophy took root. Eternity must hide itself to survive. Mentuhotep II's mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari set the tone for this transformation. Built against the cliffs of western Thebes, it combined architecture, landscape, and spiritual symbolism in a way Egypt had never seen before. It was both temple and tomb, both visible and secret, a liminal space between the living and the dead. The temple's terraces faced the rising sun, while behind them, tunnels and chambers extended into the mountain's heart, where the king was buried. To the casual eye, the temple was a monument to life and worship. Only those initiated into its mysteries knew that it was also a gateway to the underworld. This blending of openness and concealment would define Egyptian burial design for centuries to come. The pharaohs who followed Mentuhotep carried this wisdom forward. Amenemhat I, founder of the 12th dynasty, moved the capital north to Ichtai and built his pyramid at Lisht. Unlike the grand, polished pyramids of the Old Kingdom, his structure was modest, its limestone casing soon stripped away by time. Beneath it, a complex network of tunnels and chambers reflected the growing obsession with secrecy. Archaeologists who have explored these pyramids found layers of deception, false passages, dummy walls, and misleading shafts designed to confuse intruders. Even in ruin, one can sense the fear that drove their creation. The builders of the Middle Kingdom were haunted by memory, by the knowledge that their predecessors' tombs had been plundered and their mummies scattered. Senusret III, one of Egypt's most powerful and enigmatic kings, deepened this evolution. His reign marked both the height of military strength and the flowering of a new kind of introspection. His pyramid at Dashur, though small and now largely destroyed, conceals one of the most intricate burial systems ever designed, with multiple hidden corridors and burial chambers, each sealed with heavy quartzite blocks. When archaeologists uncovered the site, they found the tomb empty, the king's mummy nowhere to be seen. Some believe his body was moved to a hidden tomb in Abydos, where fragments of a royal cenotaph, a symbolic tomb, bear his name. This dual burial pattern suggests a deliberate act of misdirection, one tomb to be found, another to be forgotten. The lesson of the vanished pharaohs had been fully internalized. The body, once proudly displayed beneath mountains of stone, was now to be hidden like a divine secret. This era's artistic and literary works reveal how deeply the theme of disappearance had entered Egyptian thought. The tale of Sinuhe, a famous Middle Kingdom narrative, speaks of exile, longing, and the hope of a proper burial in one's homeland. The fear of dying unburied, of being forgotten, permeated the culture. To the Egyptians, death was not annihilation, but disconnection, a temporary state that only ritual and remembrance could bridge. Yet remembrance itself was dangerous. A name carved too boldly might invite erasure. And so, in this delicate balance between memory and concealment, the Middle Kingdom's funerary practices found their poetry. The most striking example of this philosophy is found in the tombs of Beni Hassan, where the nobles of the Middle Kingdom carved their burial chambers directly into limestone cliffs. These tombs, overlooking the Nile, are austere from the outside, but inside, they bloom with color, scenes of daily life, hunting, music, and offerings painted in luminous detail. Though not royal, these burials reflect a shift in values that the kings themselves echoed: permanence through modesty, eternity through hiddenness. The cliffs served as guardians, the landscape itself becoming a veil. The desert no longer displayed its tombs, it swallowed them. Yet even within this age of cautious wisdom, mysteries persisted. Several Middle Kingdom pyramids, at Lisht, Dashur, and Hawara, have yielded sarcophagi, but no royal remains. The pyramid of Amenemhat III at Hawara, for instance, once contained the famous labyrinth, a vast complex described by ancient writers as bewildering and immense. When 19th-century explorers entered it, they found corridors leading nowhere, shafts descending into dead ends, and chambers filled with debris. Beneath it all lay a massive granite sarcophagus, but again, no body. The mummy of Amenemhat III has never been found. Some scholars believe it was moved to a secret chamber within the same pyramid, still sealed. Others think it was buried elsewhere entirely, perhaps in the cliffs near Dashur or in a yet undiscovered royal cache. The deliberate confusion of architecture suggests that the missing king's fate was no accident. It was the point. In this light, the Middle Kingdom emerges not as a period of lost tombs, but of designed disappearance. The royal architects, learning from centuries of theft and decay, began to view concealment as a sacred art. The tomb became not just a house for the dead, but a riddle, one meant to be unsolved. Each twist of the passage, each false chamber, was a spell in stone, protecting the king's body from mortal intrusion. Eternity was no longer a matter of height or scale. It was a matter of depth and silence. As the 12th dynasty waned and the 13th splintered into dozens of short reigns, Egypt once again edged toward instability. The lessons of secrecy remained, but the craftsmanship faltered. Smaller pyramids and hidden tombs were built hastily, often left incomplete. Royal names grew shorter-lived, their legacies more fragile. And then, like a shadow falling across the desert, a new power approached from beyond Egypt's borders: the Hyksos, foreign rulers from the northeast. Their invasion marked the end of the Middle Kingdom and the beginning of another age of obscurity. Many of the last kings of the 13th and 14th dynasties vanished entirely from the archaeological record. Their pyramids, if built, have crumbled beyond recognition. Their mummies are missing, their tombs unnamed. Some may lie beneath the sands of the Fayum or the Delta, buried under millennia of flood deposits. Others may have been destroyed by the Hyksos themselves. But even in their disappearance, these kings fulfilled the wisdom of their ancestors. What is hidden endures. When the Middle Kingdom faded, it left behind a paradox, a civilization at the height of order and artistry, yet one that deliberately concealed its greatest treasures. The kings who built smaller, subtler tombs may have been forgotten by name, but not by spirit. Their legacy is written in the mystery itself, in the quiet defiance of a people who learned that to preserve eternity, one must first vanish from the world's sight. And so, as the wind moves across the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari and the buried corridors of Lisht, it carries whispers of those hidden monarchs. Their tombs, lost to time, but not to history, remind us that in ancient Egypt, disappearance was not defeat. It was transformation, the final and most perfect expression of eternal life. When the Middle Kingdom gave way to decline, Egypt once again drifted into darkness. The Second Intermediate Period, roughly spanning from 1780 to 1550 BCE, was an age of division, foreign rule, and secrecy, and with it came another great vanishing. The grand unity that had defined the 12th dynasty fractured into rival dynasties, scattered across Upper and Lower Egypt. While Thebes clung to independence in the south, the mysterious Hyksos seized control of the north, ruling from their fortified capital at Avaris in the Nile Delta. This was not merely a political shift, but a spiritual crisis. The divine order, once thought eternal, had been broken. The sacred continuity of kingship was interrupted, and in that silence, Egypt's tombs and their rulers slipped further into shadow. To the Egyptians, this period must have felt like an erasure, as if the gods themselves had turned away. Many royal monuments from this era have never been found, and even the names of certain pharaohs survive only on fragmented scarabs and inscriptions. The Hyksos, being outsiders of likely Levantine origin, did not follow the old burial traditions. Their royal necropolises remain a mystery, possibly buried beneath the silt-choked ruins of the Delta, a region notoriously difficult to excavate. Unlike the dry deserts of Upper Egypt, where tombs endured for millennia, the Delta's humidity and flooding ensured that even stone decayed swiftly. If the Hyksos kings built tombs, they have long since been reclaimed by the earth. Meanwhile, in Thebes, a lineage of native Egyptian rulers struggled to preserve the old ways. Kings such as Seqenenre-Tao, Kamose, and eventually Ahmose I waged wars of resistance against the Hyksos, battles that would reunify Egypt and birth the new kingdom. Yet the archaeological record of their burials is frustratingly incomplete. Seqenenre-Tao's mummy was discovered thousands of years later in the Deir el-Bahari cache, his skull bearing deep wounds, clear evidence that he died violently, likely in battle against the invaders. But his original tomb remains uncertain. Some believe it was located at Dra Abu el-Naga near Thebes, while others argue it was relocated for protection. Kamose, too, has no confirmed burial site, though fragments of funerary equipment bearing his name have been found. These scattered traces hint at a pattern that would define Egyptian royal burials for centuries to come: concealment as protection, movement as preservation. Ahmose I, the last great hero of this turbulent era, finally expelled the Hyksos and restored Egyptian sovereignty. He founded the 18th dynasty, inaugurating the new kingdom, the empire-building era of Hatshepsut, Thutmose, and Tutankhamun. Yet even Ahmose's own tomb remains elusive. His name appears in inscriptions at Abydos, suggesting a cenotaph or symbolic burial there, while evidence also points to a possible tomb in Thebes. Two burials, two identities, one public, one hidden. This duality encapsulates the legacy of the vanished pharaohs. Every king needed to be both seen and unseen, remembered yet untouchable. The art of burial during the Second Intermediate Period reveals the Egyptian mind grappling with vulnerability. The tombs of minor rulers and nobles from this time often feature reused materials, fragments of earlier monuments repurposed as sarcophagi or tomb decorations. This recycling of the sacred speaks of both reverence and desperation. The once sacrosanct separation between the living and the dead had blurred. In this confusion, even the bodies of kings may have been moved, reburied, or hidden to safeguard them from foreign desecration. The pattern of disappearance that began in the Old Kingdom had by now become part of Egypt's cultural DNA. In the Delta, traces of Hyksos burials offer faint clues to a vanished royal tradition. Excavations at Tel El Dabeh, ancient Avaris, have revealed richly appointed tombs containing Asiatic-style weapons, pottery, and jewelry. Some contain burials of horses, animals revered by the Hyksos elite. Yet the presumed royal tombs of their kings, such as Apophis or Kion, remain undiscovered. Were they buried with pomp and wealth, later destroyed by their Egyptian conquerors? Or were they cremated, their graves erased by history itself? The silence of the Delta gives no answer. What it does offer is a tantalizing idea that Egypt's foreign rulers might still lie beneath modern towns, fields, and canals, a lost chapter of pharaonic death awaiting rediscovery. Back in Thebes, the Egyptian resistance fostered not only military strength, but a spiritual renewal. The Theban rulers began to invoke a new form of divine alliance, one centered around Ammonius, the hidden god. Ammonius' very name means the invisible, the concealed one. It is perhaps no coincidence that as Ammonius' worship rose, the idea of hidden tombs flourished. The god of invisibility became the protector of kings who themselves sought invisibility in death. This theological shift marked a profound moment in Egypt's long meditation on mortality. Eternity was no longer about monumental display. It was about divine concealment. In this light, the missing tombs of the Second Intermediate Period acquire symbolic weight. They are not merely lost artifacts, but spiritual statements. The pharaohs who vanished during these centuries, their bodies hidden, their names fragmented, were in a sense embodying the principle of Ammonius long before the height of his cult. To be unseen was to be sacred. To vanish was to endure. As Ahmose triumphed over the Hyksos and restored Egypt's unity, he initiated a new burial practice that would define the next 500 years. Royal tombs hidden in the desert valleys west of Thebes. No more giant pyramids to attract plunderers. No more surface monuments shouting to the heavens. The tomb of the king would now be carved deep into the earth, accessible only through winding paths and secret entrances. From this seed of secrecy, the Valley of the Kings was born, a direct descendant of centuries of fear, loss, and wisdom. But before the new kingdom could rise, the last remnants of the Second Intermediate Period had to fade away. Many of its rulers, both Egyptian and Hyksos, were buried without grandeur, their monuments lost, their names forgotten. Yet their absence became the foundation for a new era of mystery. The priests of Thebes, learning from generations of devastation, would soon perfect the art of hidden eternity. The next age would not only build tombs for kings, it would build legends. In the quiet between the fall of the Hyksos and the dawn of the new kingdom, Egypt was like a lung inhaling after a long suffocation. The wars were over, but the land was still haunted by loss, by the ghosts of missing monarchs and the silence of vanished tombs. Yet from that silence, a new kind of power emerged, the power of the unseen. The Second Intermediate Period stands today as one of Egypt's most elusive epochs, its rulers both known and unknowable, its tombs both real and spectral. Perhaps somewhere beneath the delta mud or the cliffs of Thebes, the graves of Apophis, Chamos, and Ahmose still sleep in darkness. Until they are found, or until they choose to reveal themselves, they remain what they always were, guardians of Egypt's deepest truth, that eternity is not a monument to be seen, but a mystery to be felt. The dawn of the new kingdom around 1550 BCE marked one of the most dazzling resurrections in human history. Out of the darkness of foreign rule and fragmented power, Egypt emerged radiant and renewed, an empire of gold, glory, and divine certainty. The pharaohs of this era were not merely kings. They were gods walking the earth, their names carved into stone and sung in temples that stretched toward the sun. Yet, beneath this brilliance lay a quiet tension, a recognition that visibility invited danger. In their quest for eternal remembrance, these pharaohs also learned the necessity of secrecy. And so, the Age of Hidden Tombs truly began. The Theban kings of the 18th dynasty ushered in an age of empire. From the capital at Thebes, rulers like Thutmose I, Hatshepsut, and Amenhotep III launched Egypt into a golden age of art, architecture, and conquest. They expanded their dominion far beyond the Nile Valley, reaching into Nubia and Syria, amassing unimaginable wealth. The temples of Karnak and Luxor grew into colossal sanctuaries of divine power, their walls alive with hymns to Ammon-Ra, the god who was both seen and unseen, the embodiment of hidden strength. Yet, while temples proclaimed the power of the pharaoh to the living, their tombs were becoming more secretive than ever before. Thutmose I is often credited as the first ruler to be buried in what would later be called the Valley of the Kings, a secluded wadi cut deep into the cliffs west of Thebes. Unlike the grand pyramids of Giza, this new burial site was invisible from afar, hidden among winding ravines. The entrance to each tomb was concealed, designed to be known only to priests and royal builders. The tomb's chambers stretched downward into the bedrock, decorated with sacred texts, maps of the afterlife, spells from the Amduat and the Book of Gates. For the first time, the pharaoh's journey to eternity was imagined as an underground voyage through shadow and light. The king was to travel through the night, guided by Ra's solar bark, to be reborn with the dawn. This shift in burial philosophy marked a profound change in Egyptian consciousness. Eternity was no longer about monuments rising toward the heavens. It was about the hidden path through darkness. Each tomb became a secret cosmos, a symbolic universe carved in silence. The Valley of the Kings was both a cemetery and a celestial map, a labyrinth where each corridor represented an hour of the night, each chamber a threshold between worlds. The pharaohs who commissioned these tombs were preparing not just for death, but for a sacred transformation. Yet even as these tombs were sealed with divine protection, the threat of intrusion loomed large. Egypt's wealth was its own curse. Generations of grave robbers, lured by the promise of gold and gems, began targeting royal burials almost as soon as the tombs were closed. Despite magical inscriptions warning of eternal torment for those who desecrated a tomb, greed proved stronger than fear. By the late New Kingdom, many royal tombs had already been plundered. Even a valley's hidden entrances could not protect them from time and human ambition. The pharaohs responded to this growing danger with even greater secrecy. Tomb designs became more complex, corridors steeper, entrances disguised beneath rockfalls or false paths. The architects of Deir el-Medina, the community of workers who built the royal tombs, were sworn to secrecy, bound by sacred oaths never to reveal the location of a pharaoh's final resting place. But as history would later show, not even oaths could last forever. The knowledge of these tombs passed down through families, and in times of famine or political unrest, that knowledge became a form of currency, a way to survive by betraying the dead. Despite these vulnerabilities, the 18th dynasty produced some of Egypt's most extraordinary tombs. Hatshepsut's temple tomb at Deir el-Bahari, rising in terraces from the desert floor, remains a marvel of harmony and grace. Her successor, Thutmose III, whose military genius forged Egypt's empire, chose a more hidden resting place deep in the Valley of the Kings. His tomb's steep descent symbolizing both humility and transcendence. Later, Amenhotep III's reign saw the zenith of Egyptian prosperity, reflected in his immense mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes. But even this masterpiece was reduced to ruin by the elements and time. Its colossal statues, the famous colossi of Memnon, standing alone today, as weathered sentinels of a vanished empire. Then came one of the most mysterious figures in Egyptian history, Akhenaten, the heretic king. Rejecting the worship of Ammonius and the hidden gods, Akhenaten established a new religion centered on Aten, the visible sun disk. He moved the royal court to a new capital, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, and abandoned the traditions that had guided Egypt for centuries. His tomb, carved into the cliffs of Amarna, followed his revolutionary ideals, open, bright, and unhidden. But after his death, his entire legacy was erased. His city fell into ruin, his name was chiseled from monuments, and his tomb was desecrated. Ironically, the pharaoh who sought openness vanished almost completely from memory, while the hidden kings of Thebes endured in shadow. The restoration of Ammonius' cult under Tutankhamun and later pharaohs reaffirmed the old faith in concealment. The boy king's own tomb, discovered largely intact in 1922, remains the most famous archaeological find in history. Yet it is also an exception. Tutankhamun's burial was unusually small for a king, perhaps because he died young and unexpectedly. Its modest scale, and perhaps its hidden placement beneath later constructions, saved it from the fate that befell other tombs. His untouched resting place became a time capsule of new kingdom belief, gold, ritual, and rebirth preserved in silence for more than 3,000 years. As the new kingdom matured into its 19th and 20th dynasties, the Valley of the Kings grew crowded with tombs. The builders began carving deeper, sometimes crossing the paths of older burials. In this maze of overlapping histories, the line between sacred and secret blurred further. Tombs of Seti I, Ramesses II, and later Ramesses III showcase both artistic mastery and increasing anxiety about security. Passages twist and turn like mazes, perhaps symbolic of the underworld's complexity, or perhaps deliberate deterrence to would-be robbers. The priests of Thebes eventually realized that no tomb, however well hidden, could escape violation forever. During the later New Kingdom, they began relocating royal mummies to secret collective caches, hiding the bodies of the kings to preserve them from desecration. This practice would lead to discoveries millennia later in the Deir el-Bahari cache and the Valley of the King's Tomb KV-35, where dozens of royal mummies were found rewrapped and reburied together. These priestly rescues were acts of both devotion and desperation, the final attempt to protect what the pharaohs had once believed to be inviolable. By the time the New Kingdom faded into decline, the Valley of the Kings was a place of ghosts. The living world had changed, dynasties had fallen, temples crumbled, and the desert began its slow reclamation. Yet beneath the cliffs, the pharaohs remained. Some were known, others nameless, their tombs sealed in quiet eternity. The contrast between the shining empire above and the silent labyrinth below defines the paradox of the New Kingdom. The more the Egyptians sought to preserve eternity, the more it eluded them. The New Kingdom stands as the golden era of hidden tombs, a civilization at the height of its power, yet obsessed with concealment. Its kings built wonders to outlast time, even as they prepared for the certainty of being forgotten. Perhaps they understood a truth that still resonates in the hush of the desert night, that the divine is not always meant to be seen. In the darkness beneath Thebes, surrounded by paintings of stars and spells of rebirth, they entrusted their eternity to the mystery of the hidden world, and in doing so, became eternal after all. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt's golden age had begun to dim. The once mighty empire, which had stretched from the Euphrates to the heart of Nubia, was shrinking back upon itself. Its temples still glittered in the sun, its priests still recited hymns to Ammonius and Ra, but beneath that grandeur lay exhaustion. Centuries of warfare, political intrigue, and tomb robbery had eroded both wealth and faith. The late Ramesside pharaohs, proud descendants of Ramesses the Great, now ruled a land burdened by memory. And as Egypt's strength faded, so too did its confidence in eternity. The final kings of the New Kingdom would witness the unraveling of the very system that had once promised them everlasting life. The 20th dynasty, beginning with Setnacht and reaching its height under Ramesses III, tried to revive the lost glory of earlier generations. Ramesses III, often called the last of the great pharaohs, defended Egypt from foreign invasions and commissioned vast building projects to proclaim his divine authority. His mortuary temple at Medinet Habu stands today as one of the best preserved in all of Egypt, a fortress of stone decorated with scenes of conquest and divine favor. Yet even as these grand monuments were carved, Egypt's internal world was collapsing. Economic hardship, corruption, and famine struck deep. The workers of Deir el-Medina, who once built the secret tombs of kings, began to protest unpaid wages, the first recorded labor strike in human history. In these desperate times, the sanctity of royal tombs suffered most. The Valley of the Kings, once a sacred sanctuary of secrecy, had become a target. Bands of robbers, sometimes aided by those who knew the valley's hidden passages, began to plunder the tombs systematically. Gold and amulets were stripped from mummies, sacred texts torn apart for their decorative pigment, and sarcophagi broken open for whatever could be sold. Papyrus records from this period, such as the Abbott Papyrus and the Amherst Papyrus, provide chillingly precise accounts of tomb robberies and the officials tasked with investigating them. They reveal a society in moral crisis, where the line between piety and desperation had blurred. Even royal names could no longer guarantee eternal protection. Ramesses IX, one of the later kings of this era, commissioned inquiries into these robberies. The results, carefully recorded, show that even the tombs of his predecessors had not been spared. Imagine the irony: a living god ordering reports on how his own ancestors had been desecrated, fully aware that his own burial would likely face the same fate. This growing sense of insecurity changed everything. Tomb building slowed. The once elaborate underground complexes gave way to smaller, hastily finished chambers. And more importantly, the priests of Ammonius began to take matters into their own hands. The priesthood, by this time, had become Egypt's true power. In Thebes, the high priests of Ammonius controlled immense wealth and influence, rivaling and eventually surpassing the authority of the pharaohs themselves. They declared themselves servants of the hidden god, but in practice, they ruled as kings in all but name. With this new power came a new responsibility: to protect the royal dead. The priests realized that the Valley of the Kings could no longer be defended from thieves. And so, in the twilight of the new kingdom, they began one of the most secretive operations in ancient history: the Great Reburial Project. In hidden ceremonies conducted under torchlight, the priests opened the violated tombs of the pharaohs, gathered their scattered remains, and rewrapped the royal mummies in fresh linen. They removed them from their original resting places and concealed them together in deep communal caches, sealed away in cliffs and caves. Two such sites would eventually be discovered by archaeologists: the Deir el-Bahari cache, known as DB 320, and the tomb KV35 in the Valley of the Kings. Within them lay dozens of royal mummies, among them Seti I, Ramesses II, Thutmose III, and many others who had once ruled the greatest empire on earth. They were now resting shoulder to shoulder, their names inked on linen bands, their identities preserved not by stone, but by secrecy. The reburial process was both tragic and deeply reverent. The priests understood that they could not restore what was lost: the splendor, the architecture, the public rituals, but they could preserve the essence of kingship, the name and the body. In doing so, they became the last guardians of the pharaoh's immortality. Their task was not to glorify the dead, but to hide them completely so that they might sleep undisturbed. This transformation marked the final evolution of Egypt's funerary philosophy. What had begun with pyramids rising toward the sky ended with tombs swallowed by the earth. When archaeologists uncovered these caches thousands of years later, they found evidence of this care: inscriptions listing the names of the reburied kings, and layers of linen from different periods showing repeated rewraps over time. The Deir el-Bahari cache in particular is a haunting sight. dozens of kings, queens, and royal children, each labeled with careful handwriting, lying together in eternal silence. Some mummies still bore the marks of earlier desecration, broken limbs, cut wrappings, missing jewels, yet their final state reflected an act of love. The priests of Ammonius had done what the empire itself could not. They had saved Egypt's memory from total annihilation. But this act of preservation also symbolized the end of an era. When the 21st dynasty began, Egypt was no longer united under one ruler. The north and south drifted apart. Tanis in the delta became the political capital, while Thebes remained the spiritual one. Pharaohs still reigned in name, but real power lay with local rulers and high priests. The royal tombs built during this period were modest, often reusing older structures. The age of monumental ambition had ended, replaced by cautious practicality. The tombs themselves, smaller and simpler, reflected a civilization that had grown weary of grandeur. And yet, even in decline, the Egyptian obsession with the afterlife endured. The tombs of the later New Kingdom and early Third Intermediate Period still carried inscriptions from the Book of the Dead and images of protective deities. What had changed was tone. The art grew more intimate, more personal, less about imperial power, more about individual salvation. The idea of the afterlife had shifted from a cosmic drama of divine kingship to a quieter, almost private hope of safe passage through the underworld. The end of the New Kingdom thus marks both a loss and a revelation. It was the moment when Egypt turned inward, when the hidden world of tombs became not a stage for power, but a refuge for memory. The pharaohs, once visible as radiant gods, had retreated fully into shadow, guarded not by armies or monuments, but by the faith of a few devoted priests and the concealment of the desert itself. As the night falls over Thebes in imagination, one can picture those final ceremonies, the flickering light of oil lamps, the solemn chanting of names, the careful sealing of stone doors that would not open again for thousands of years. Outside, the desert wind would have carried the same silence that still hangs over the Valley of the Kings today. The last embers of empire faded, but beneath the sand, the pharaohs continued their eternal journey. Egypt's golden light had dimmed, but its mystery had deepened. The kings who had once sought to be remembered forever were now hidden beyond reach, waiting for rediscovery. Their invisibility, born of tragedy, would become their greatest form of immortality. As Egypt entered the Third Intermediate Period, beginning around 1070 BCE, the land of the pharaohs had become a realm of shadows. The once great empire was no longer united under one throne. Instead, Egypt fractured into multiple centers of power, each with its own rulers, priests, and armies. In the north, the kings of Tanis claimed legitimacy as heirs of the New Kingdom, while in the south, the high priests of Ammonius in Thebes held spiritual dominion. Between them stretched a landscape of fading glory, temples crumbling under neglect, tombs long plundered, and ancient cities half swallowed by sand. Yet, in this dim age, Egypt did not lose its reverence for eternity. On the contrary, it refined it into something quieter, more secret, and more profoundly human. The Third Intermediate Period is often viewed as an age of decline, but in truth, it represents a transformation from empire to endurance. Without the immense wealth or manpower of earlier dynasties, the Egyptians could no longer build colossal monuments. The grand tombs of the Valley of the Kings were abandoned, their locations known only to a few, and the once bustling necropolis workers' village of Deir el-Medina was deserted. But the spirit of sacred burial did not die. It simply moved. New burial grounds emerged in both north and south, Tanis in the delta, and Elis Asif and Medinet Habu near Thebes. Each bore traces of innovation born from necessity: smaller chambers, reused sarcophagi, and burials hidden within older structures to deter robbers. At Tanis, the kings of the 21st and 22nd dynasties sought to emulate the traditions of their ancestors while adapting to their changing world. They built tombs beneath their own temples, placing their mummies in heavy silver and gold coffins, and surrounding themselves with reused treasures from the Valley of the Kings. The discovery of Susin's Eyes tomb in 1940 revealed that even in this so-called Dark Age, Egyptian craftsmanship still reached breathtaking heights. Susin's mask of solid silver, his jewelry, and the intricate decoration of his burial chamber stand as proof that devotion to the afterlife endured even in diminished times. Yet Tanis itself, built upon the shifting delta soils, became a fragile memory, its monuments eroded by floods, its tombs collapsing beneath layers of silt. Egypt's north had wealth, but no permanence. In Thebes, the situation was different. There, the priesthood of Ammonius ruled as spiritual monarchs, governing not through armies but through ritual and divine authority. The high priests buried themselves near their god's temple in modest, yet piously decorated tombs. These burials, such as those found in the Asasif necropolis, demonstrate a new intimacy, a focus on the individual's relationship with the divine rather than on royal grandeur. The artwork of the time softened. Figures became gentler, expressions more contemplative. The texts inscribed within these tombs no longer boasted of conquest or cosmic dominion, but instead prayed for protection, forgiveness, and union with Ammonius, the Hidden One. It was as if Egypt, weary from centuries of empire, had turned inward, seeking peace rather than power. The decentralization of Egypt's rule also meant that knowledge of older tombs and caches began to fade. The priests of Ammonius still guarded the secret resting places of the ancient kings, but over time, those locations were forgotten, their entrances concealed by rockfalls or shifting sands. The mummies reburied in DB 320 and KV 35 remained undisturbed, hidden beneath layers of myth and geography. This growing distance between the living and their buried kings lent an air of mystery to Thebes. To the people of the Third Intermediate Period, the tombs of their ancestors had already entered legend, a silent kingdom beneath their feet, invisible yet omnipresent. In the art and literature of the era, this awareness of hiddenness took on symbolic depth. The Egyptians began to describe the afterlife not as a grand cosmic journey, but as a personal, secret path, a walk through the darkness guided by one's own purity of heart. The god Osiris, long the ruler of the dead, became more relatable, not a distant deity, but a mirror of every person's hope for renewal. The funerary texts of this period reflect humility and introspection. Spells emphasize moral virtue over royal birth, compassion over conquest. The invisible became the sacred ideal, mirroring the land's own condition, where power itself had gone underground. Even the materials of tomb construction reflected this quiet adaptation. Stone gave way to mud brick and plaster. Fine limestone was replaced by simpler paints and wooden panels. But though the materials were humbler, the artistry remained deeply spiritual. The delicate blue and yellow pigments, the tender depictions of family and divine embrace, show that Egypt's belief in eternity still burned softly beneath the weight of political decay. In this way, the Third Intermediate Period preserved the soul of the civilization, even as its body aged. The rulers of the later dynasties, Shoshenq, Osorkon, Taklot, continued to build tombs, though often in places not yet fully understood. Excavations at Bubastis, Tanis, and Leontopolis have revealed fragments of royal burials, but many more remain undiscovered, possibly buried beneath modern towns or lost to the delta's shifting water levels. In Upper Egypt, the Libyan princes who ruled as Theban kings also left faint traces. Modest crypts adorned with prayers to Ammonius and Osiris, their walls speaking softly of continuity amid change. These were not the works of conquerors, but of caretakers, men who saw themselves as stewards of Egypt's spiritual flame. As the centuries passed, foreign influences began to seep into Egyptian life. Libyan dynasties brought new artistic motifs. Nubian kings from the south, during the 25th dynasty, would later restore much of Egypt's old grandeur. But in this in-between time, the Third Intermediate Period was marked by silence. a long, patient pause in which Egypt's soul caught its breath. The sand slowly gathered over older tombs, concealing them entirely. Even a knowledge of where the Valley of the Kings lay became uncertain in some regions. The once vivid memory of the pharaohs who vanished without a trace was fading into myth. And yet, this very fading gave rise to endurance. Egypt had learned through millennia that eternity was not built in stone. It was written in belief. The third intermediate period embodies that lesson more clearly than any other age. Though the monuments diminished, though power scattered, the ancient rhythms continued. The prayers to Ra at sunrise, the offerings to the dead, the recitations of the Book of the Dead during burials. Every small tomb, every humble inscription, was a quiet act of defiance against time. Today, the tombs of this era remain among Egypt's least explored. Many lie beneath the waters of the delta or under the foundations of modern towns. Others rest undisturbed near Thebes, their entrances still hidden beneath rubble and sand. Somewhere among them may lie forgotten kings, rulers whose names survive only on fragmentary lists, their resting places unmarked, their legacies silent. Each undiscovered burial is a reminder that Egypt's story is not finished. It sleeps beneath the surface, waiting for those who listen carefully enough to hear its heartbeat. The third intermediate period, then, stands as a bridge between Egypt's ancient glory and its lingering mystery. It is the era where concealment became culture and endurance replaced empire. The pharaohs no longer shouted their names to the heavens. They whispered them to the desert. And the desert, ever faithful, has kept their secret. By the late period, Egypt stood like an aged monument, worn but unbroken. The great dynasties had faded, yet the spirit of eternity lingered. Kings such as Psamtik and Nectanebo tried to revive past glory, building temples and tombs that imitated older forms. But their work was nostalgic, not eternal. The golden age of Thebes had passed. The sacred tombs of new pharaohs were modest, built in the soft delta earth that soon swallowed them whole. Foreign powers pressed upon Egypt, Assyrians, Persians, and finally the Greeks. Yet its faith in immortality endured. The royal tombs disappeared, but the belief that death was a passage, not an end, remained unshaken. Temples in Saqqara and Abydos still echoed with quiet prayers to Osiris, and small tombs continued to bloom with art that spoke of eternal life through peace rather than power. When Nectanebo II, Egypt's last native pharaoh, fled south before the Persians, his burial was lost to history. Legends say he vanished into the desert, guarded by spells and silence. That mystery became Egypt's final echo, the last act of a civilization that had mastered the art of disappearance. Even under Alexander's rule, the old faith survived, carried in whispers by priests and painters who remembered that eternity is not destroyed, only hidden. In the end, the late period's kings found immortality not in stone, but in absence. Their missing tombs became symbols of Egypt itself, ancient, unbroken, and forever beyond full discovery. Centuries rolled on, and Egypt became a land of legends. Beneath the rule of Greece, then Rome, its sacred tombs vanished beneath the sand. Travelers from distant lands spoke of treasures guarded by curses, of sleeping kings hidden in secret cities. The true tombs of Thebes and Saqqara lay forgotten, but their mystery deepened with every passing age. Arab chroniclers during the Middle Ages wrote of pharaohs who mastered magic and entombed themselves in golden chambers guarded by jinn. The pyramids became symbols of forbidden knowledge, their hieroglyphs mistaken for spells. The ancient dead had turned into myths, their silence more powerful than their names. By the time Napoleon's scholars arrived, Egypt was both ruin and revelation. Artists sketched broken temples. Explorers descended into tombs that had not felt human breath for millennia. And though science sought to explain, wonder refused to vanish. When the Rosetta Stone was deciphered and hieroglyphs spoke again, Egypt awoke, but not fully. Even as the tombs of kings were rediscovered, many remained missing. Technology has revealed voids beneath the cliffs, hinting at more secrets yet to come. The dream of finding Nefertiti's tomb, or others lost forever, keeps curiosity alive. For Egypt's desert still guards its mysteries like a patient god, revealing, then concealing, in the rhythm of eternity. As night falls over the Nile, Egypt breathes softly beneath its stars. The desert, vast and silent, guards the dreams of kings long gone. The missing tombs of queens, warriors, and divine rulers lie somewhere beneath the shifting dunes, their secrets untouched by time. Perhaps that is Egypt's greatest gift, that it still keeps something hidden. Every uncovered tomb only deepens the mystery, reminding us that knowledge is never complete. The vanished pharaohs endure not in stone, but in memory, in the unending search for what was lost. Archaeologists dig and scan, guided as much by hope as by science. Yet each discovery feels like an offering rather than a conquest. To open a tomb is to touch silence itself, to hear the faint echo of eternity breathing through dust. The ancients believed that to speak the name of the dead is to make them live again. And so, when we whisper their names, Ramses, Hatshepsut, Tutankhamun, we keep their souls awake. The pharaohs are not gone. They rest in our imagination, in the timeless heartbeat of the desert. Egypt's power lies not in what it shows, but in what it withholds. Its mystery is its immortality, a promise whispered through wind and sand that eternity will always hide just beyond reach.